By the end of October 1942, the city on the Volga still has not fallen. The Führer announces to the German people, "We have taken Stalingrad. A few pockets of resistance remain. We will take them one by one. It is just a question of time." For Hitler, Stalingrad has come to represent his victory over Russia. After 2 years of fighting in Russia, the Germans have threatened to vanquish the Eastern Giant. In the north, Leningrad is surrounded by the Germans. It has been a year since the Germans entered this northern city. In the center, Moscow, the target city, remains just within reach for the Germans. In the south, the drive towards the Baku oil fields has come to a halt in the Caucasus Mountains. In Stalingrad, the Soviets are holding their ground. Contrary to Hitler's declarations, Soviet boats continue to cross the Volga, bringing over reinforcements. Every day, thousands of young Russian men, sometimes without any weapons or military training, are disembarked on the riverbanks. Those who back away from the German shells are ruthlessly executed by the political commissars. On the 7th of November, the anniversary of the revolution, the beleaguered soldiers holding Stalingrad and the Soviet troops all along the front listen to their commander-in-chief, Stalin, make this astonishing declaration. "Tomorrow there will be celebrations in our streets." And indeed, General Zhukov, the man who saved Moscow, has a plan to keep those pockets of resistance fighting to the very end, in order to retain the German troops of General Paulus inside Stalingrad. On the other side of the Volga, Zhukov is secretly putting together an entire army. The country has been ravaged, 1/4 of its territory lost. But the entire Soviet Union is toiling away to provide this new army with huge amounts of equipment. Factories that were moved out and rebuilt behind the Ural Mountains are operating 24 hours a day. In this endeavor, lives will be sacrificed. It is the winter of 1942. The women working in these unheated, sometimes roofless workshops are cold and hungry. Many will die of exhaustion. But the country's industrial production will increase tenfold. The United States is now providing massive amounts of aid to the Soviet Union. The Allies are able to reduce the threat posed by German submarines in the North Atlantic by forming protected convoys to Soviet ports, such as Murmansk. Anti-communism is put on hold. For the Americans, Joseph Stalin is now Uncle Joe, and for the British, good old Joe. The Russians receive huge shipments of jeeps, tanks, planes and trucks, and cans of corned beef. When they open the tins of meat, the Russian soldiers joke, "We're opening the second front." Along with Stalin, everyone expects the Allies to do more to alleviate their plight. The British, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the South Africans, and the Free French. As soon as he arrived, Montgomery, the son of a clergyman, ordered a new program of strict rules and discipline to be imposed. Montgomery launches his offensive with a preliminary artillery barrage, followed by a massive tank assault. But the German 88 flak guns cause tremendous losses. Rommel's soldiers counterattack relentlessly. The battle turns into a bayonet charge, just like in the Battle of the Somme in 1916, with heavy casualties on both sides. In this deadly game, it is the side with the most men that wins. In a letter to his wife, Rommel writes, "We're simply being crushed by the enemy's weight." He receives a message from Hitler. There can be no other thought than to stand fast, yield not a yard of ground. Rommel writes back to his wife, "I rack my brains for a way out of this plight for my poor troops. We are facing perhaps the most difficult days that a man can undergo." And he adds, "The dead are lucky. It's all over for them." Rommel retreats. In London, Churchill announces to his fellow citizens what is really the first good news of the war.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Churchill's words ring out around the world. The old British lion has stood up to Hitler. Back in his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, Hitler is scornful. He says, "It is just a setback. The war will go on." And indeed it does. The Allies open up a new front in North Africa, a first step towards controlling the Mediterranean. As in 1917, American troops sail across the Atlantic. The French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who was exiled in New York, will return from the US with one of these military convoys. The author of The Little Prince writes, "Friends in America, I'd like to do you complete justice. 50,000 soldiers were going to war not for the United States, but for humanity, for human respect, for human freedom, and human greatness." Off the coast of Casablanca and Oran, the British and Americans are greeted with cannon fire from the Vichy French. They counterattack. North Africa is still controlled by the Vichy regime, which collaborates with the Germans. The fighting is violent, and the Vichy forces suffer extensive damage. The Free France leader, General de Gaulle, makes a speech over the radio in London.
Chefs, soldats, marins, aviateurs, fonctionnaires, colons français d'Afrique du Nord, levez-vous, aidez nos alliés, joignez-vous à eux sans réserve.
After 2 days of fighting against the liberators, the guns are silenced. The Allies secure their landing. In Algiers, the pragmatic US Commander-in-Chief, General Eisenhower, negotiates with the Vichy regime's military commander, Admiral Darlan. Darlan is one of France's most die-hard collaborators, who had even met Hitler. He decides to switch sides, and the French forces in Algeria and Morocco join the Allies. A few weeks later, Darlan will be assassinated by a French resistance fighter. Many of the French in North Africa greet the Americans warmly. The Zouaves in the French Army of Africa are also relieved. They never really wanted to shoot at the Americans. In fact, they will soon be fighting side by side with them, like almost all of the other French colonials. as will the indigenous soldiers, as they are called at the time, who will form the Moroccan and Algerian tirailleur units. The Axis powers have anticipated the Allies by moving into Tunisia, a territory still controlled by the Vichy regime, which allows the Germans to stay. Rommel is retreating towards Tunisia. 2 days later, in order to secure the Mediterranean coast, Hitler invades southern France, the hitherto unoccupied free zone. Hitler's orders are to take the port of Toulon, where most of the Vichy navy is based. With their shaky autonomy now at risk, the Vichy admirals decide to scuttle their fleet. They proceed to sink their own ships in order to keep them from falling into the hands of the Germans or the Allies. That is the tragic result of the politics of the Vichy regime. But it's not good news for Hitler. With the arrival of the Germans, those Jews hiding in the remaining pockets of French tolerance have little chance of survival. Amidst the increasingly sinister atmosphere of roundups and denunciations all over Europe, children are saved. 3,000 kilometers away, outside of Stalingrad, the Germans have been enjoying a brief respite behind the lines before returning to fight the Russians in order to eliminate their remaining pockets of resistance. The German army's flanks are defended by units from the Reich's satellite countries, Romanians, Hungarians, and Italians, who are totally unaware of the danger looming just around the corner. A few kilometers away, the Soviet troops are preparing to attack. They are ready to fight, and there are over 1 million of them. They are going to storm the enemy's weakest units in order to surround the German army occupying Stalingrad. At 7 a.m., the Soviets obliterate the enemy's lines, pounding them with the rocket launchers they call Stalin's organs. Zhukov's massive army launches the offensive. At Kursk, the outcome is devastating for the Germans, who have already lost 50,000 men in this battle. Von Manstein wants reinforcements in order to continue his offensive. He is waiting for Hitler. He immediately tells him, "We have suffered losses, but the Russians have too, even worse." Hitler seems very hesitant. He mutters a few inanities. Von Manstein will write, "He seems to me to be quite feeble." This impression is confirmed when von Manstein shows Hitler the figures of the losses incurred at Kursk. Since the beginning of the war, 2 million German soldiers have already been killed, wounded, or gone missing in action. Hitler will never be able to fill that void. Things are now a far cry from the victories of the Lightning War campaigns, the Blitzkrieg of the Battle of France. Kursk is the real turning point in the war, because Hitler moves over to the defensive. Overcome by paranoia, he insists on having stenographers present. Von Manstein does not believe that everything is lost, but Hitler disagrees. Von Manstein implores him to continue the offensive. Hitler refuses. the Battle of Kursk is over. For Hitler, the priority now is to send reinforcements over to Sicily, where the Allies have just landed. The noose is tightening. Things are moving fast. All Hitler can do is try to hold back the advancing Allies. This is the idea behind Fortress Europe, whose emblem is the Atlantic Wall, a staggering system of fortifications stretching from Norway down to the Spanish border. Rommel is put in charge of defending Fortress Europe. He says, "It is absolutely necessary that we push the British and Americans back from the beaches. Afterwards, it will be too late. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. It will be the longest day." For Rommel and the Nazis, this is the beginning of the twilight of the gods, the final months of Nazi Germany. And yet these German newsreel images of Rommel, who has been invited to tea by Magda Goebbels, the wife of the propaganda minister, are revealing of the mood of the Nazis at this point in the war. Nazi ideology puts faith in victory and vanquishes doubt. Magda Goebbels worships Hitler like a god, even though he is driving Germany into a frenzy of bloodshed and death. Magda Goebbels has given all of her 6 children first names that begin with the letter H, just like Hitler. Helga, Hildegard, Huldine, Helmut, Hedwig, and Heidrun. She will kill them all, one by one, on the last day of the Reich.